Metrics. What's the baseline? So these are questions that we get to ask ourselves, and organizations sometimes, right? Some organizations, fail to go through this exercise, which is figuring out what's the baseline. What are we measuring against? We're going to, participate and build out DEI, but what are we trying to do? Where are we now in terms of the framework, in terms of our DEI metrics, right? So that's the first thing. What is our baseline? Right? Because if we don't have a baseline, we have nothing to measure against, then we don't actually know that we're making progress, right? So that's really important. And in order to understand and determine the baseline, we get to really, and this is something that, I really do think there's value in doing this, is drilling down on filters, having multiple filters, looking at a cross-section of diversity attributes when we're looking at the metric. And I hear a little baby. I think I know who that little baby is. So when we look at these cross-section of diversity attributes, really what that means is, what I often see organizations doing is they'll run numbers and they'll say, okay, we looked at, the demographics of, gender or ethnicity or race. We looked at, age range, right? So that's fine. You can look at that stuff, but the more you drill down, the more of a story, the more you can understand where there are opportunities and there are pockets for growth and change. And it can be a little daunting for organizations to do this, but if we don't do this, we're actually not moving the needle, right? We actually don't know what our baseline is, and we're not actually working towards affecting real change, right? Because what we want to do is we want to have prescriptive, descriptive, and predictive analytics, right? So what are we where are we, right? Where do we have opportunity? And where do we want to end up? Where do we want to land? And in order to be able to answer those questions, we get to drill down on the cross-section of diversity attributes. So what that could look like is, right? So many of us we're in organizations that are in multiple regions of the nation or of the globe. So what we get to do is we get to drill down. You can look at multiple filters rather than just looking at, okay, let's look at the cross-section of gender across, different regions, or gender across different job titles. We can look at gender and drill down gender, and then drill down gender and ethnicity, and then drill down even further and look at location and job title. So if you drill down within these 4 different categories that I mentioned, so gender, ethnicity, job title, and I forget the other one, location, right? And you're drilling down, then you're actually able to figure out where there are pockets of opportunity. So if you just look at gender across the organization, you might say, oh yeah, we have a pretty great distribution, right? In terms of gender across these different, offices. But if you look at gender, right, and you look at position, what you might find is that, okay, right, in this engineering department in X location, right, we don't have an even distribution, or the distribution that we would like. And there might be a rationale for that, but if we're not even looking at those numbers, we're not even looking at those metrics, then we don't even understand what our baseline is and what we're, why we're not able to substantiate why our numbers are the way they are, and we're not able to have a target of where we want to go. All right, so I'm going to stop talking in about 5 minutes and open it up to questions. So start thinking about your questions, and hopefully this is eliciting a lot of questions or feedback. Feel free to start submitting any questions in the chat function as well, please. Accountable. Who is being held accountable? So when we build out DEI programs and initiatives, what we sometimes, some organizations don't do enough of or can do more of is identifying specifically who is going to be held accountable. We're doing all this stuff, but who's actually going to, is responsible for making sure that we're actually implementing it and that we're hitting our targets. And, here are some examples. Of course, talent acquisition could be one, right? Hiring managers, that's another, group of people that we often overlook in this conversation around DEI, and they have so much, they can have a lot of impact. Human resources, right? The executive leadership team. And oftentimes when I work with organizations, I often see them, they focus mostly on the executive leadership and human resources. Those are people that are held accountable. But what I'm suggesting is that there are other groups that can actually be involved, right? In DEI strategy, building it out and being held accountable. And of course, the board, right? So we want to make sure that we know what the board is thinking. We understand what their direction is, and we're able to follow up with our board of trustees. And then lastly, mapping, right? What's a realistic timeline? So I love, and I worked with one organization where they literally came up with 25 things that they wanted to do around DEI in 1 year. And I was like, no, you guys, this is not realistic. I know we have a lot of aspirations. We really want to make change, but we've got to have a realistic time frame, because when we don't, and we decide we're going to achieve all these things in 1 year, we don't. Guess what? We end up feeling like failures, right? And the organization, employees feel like, we haven't actually made an impact. So we really want to make sure that we're being realistic in terms of our timeline. We want to ask ourselves if we have a budget, not just a budget for, this idea of DEI, but each and every program. Do we have a budget? What's that budget? Right? Again, if this is a business imperative, then the conversation around DEI and the budget should be included in our budget conversations, our annual budget review cycle. This should be part of it. And whoever, we've got to figure out, determine who should own that budget. What ideas should go in the parking lot? So not all ideas should be achieved in 1 year. Honestly, if you've got 3 ideas, that's even a lot, right? Because all of the initiatives that we have around DEI are probably larger projects. They're bigger projects. And so they end up, needing to be broken down and broken out. So do we have the budget? What should go in the parking lot? And the parking lot is great because you can always go back to that parking lot and pick up more projects and initiatives later. And another question that's really important. Are we going to focus on the external or the internal first? Meaning that, are we focusing on our organization and the strategy that will impact our employees and our internal organization? Or are we focusing first on initiatives and projects and strategies that will impact our partners, our clients first, right? So it's important to ask that question, because what we don't want to do is overwhelm ourselves with too many projects and initiatives. And it's important so that we know exactly what the ROI is going to be, right? By determining whether we're going to start with internal or external first.